Okay, welcome to exercise 3, where we're going to be exploring how a new chick faces the world that it emerges into. So if a good quality fertilized egg is produced by a female bird, the next step is for the developing embryo inside to grow and to hatch out from an egg and to enter the world. And this is fraught with danger. So eggs are really vulnerable. In some ways, they're this kind of perfect thing, this self-contained life support system for the growing embryo. But in another sense, they are, well, quite literally in some cases, sitting ducks, because they have no defense. So although they can provide the embryo pretty much everything it needs, they can't offer any real defense against external threats. So things like predators or even damage or disturbance caused by us. So for example, things like walking and disturbing the parents off the nest, or farm machinery that might destroy nests and so on. But even if an egg does survive all of these perils and the embryo develops to the point where it's ready to hatch, it is still a huge challenge to break out of the egg. In the last couple of days of incubation, the almost hatch size embryo must turn within the egg, and it must get itself into the right position. The air cell is at the blunt end of the egg, and this is where the embryo must get to in order to get oxygen when it needs to start to breathe. So it must puncture through the shell membrane into the air cell of the egg and breathe in oxygen for the first time, so that it can get a big boost of energy to break out of the shell from the inside. Now, getting into position is really hard. The embryo is cramped inside the egg, and the inability to get into the correct position is actually a major cause of mortality at the late stages of embryo development in birds. And if you look at some of the species we've talked about today, some of those wading bird species, which have got incredibly long legs and incredibly long beaks as well, actually inside those eggs, it's all leg and beak. And it's actually quite incredible to imagine how they ever manage to get into the right position and move around as they need to. Now, parental behavior here is crucial. So the parent bird needs to turn the eggs in the nest to help with that kind of movement and to stop the embryo from getting stuck within the egg, and also communication. So amazingly, the parent and the offspring can communicate with each other even before the chick hatches, while it's still inside the egg. And recent research has actually recorded the chirping sounds that the chicks can make inside the egg, and the communication that results between the parent and offspring, and shown that this is also crucial for successful hatching. And then they are out into the world. And at first, this world is their nest. And so for tree nesting species, this could be an expertly woven cup or a hollow somewhere. For ground nesting birds, of which lots of the birds that we've been talking about and the birds that are here on Tetney Marshes, these are ground nesting, many of them are ground nesting birds. The nest is the long vegetation that grows up all around them, or in some cases, like the oyster catcher, it might just be a pebbly scrape on the shore. Now, the function of the nest is safety. It's essentially a hiding place, and it provides a kind of protective screen until the chick is ready to venture out into the world. And I just want to give you a sense of what it might be like to be in the nest as an egg or a chick. And I'm very grateful to Jose Alves, who allowed me to share with you this video that he recorded of a black-tailed godwit nest. So we're inside the nest now, looking up from the egg's perspective, and soon we will see the mother bird coming back to the nest, and listen as well. So what you could see at the end there was actually the mum coming to settle down onto the eggs to incubate. So you've got that sense of this expanse above, and then mum coming in and providing that warmth and protection. And that's just one example. If you go onto the Twitter feed that you can see at the bottom there are lots of examples of these brilliant videos that have been filmed from inside the nest, and you can see various different species and often hear that communication between the mother and the chick while the chicks are still in the eggs as well. So I really recommend you go and have a look at that.
So that idea of being kind of almost in the landscape looking out is something that's also been quite interesting to landscape painters, because rather than looking out across Tetney Marsh at the view, it's thinking about being in the marsh, looking up and out, immersed. So you're not having a sense of ownership, but rather a sense of being entangled with. And these are a couple of paintings that I've done of the salt marsh plants at Tetney Marsh, and they're very relevant because there's a complete link between the vegetation around the bird's nest and the birds themselves. So one of the reasons I've shown you these is that Harriet's going to lead you through an exercise to which you can respond either by drawing or by writing. And it's going to be accompanied by some of the photographs that I took, imagining that I was a bird or a more than human something crawling through the undergrowth with my camera.
Thanks. So I'm going to lead you in an exercise now which requires you to do some radical imagining, but we hope that what we've done through these sort of 3 exercises culminating in this will actually enable you to do this, and particularly perhaps that video, that extraordinary video that we've just seen from within the perspective of the nest, which makes you kind of realize that the nest is an enclosed safe space, but it's also connected with the outside before the chick even comes out, which is sort of amazing thought. And also those images of the landscape very close to that Judy's shown. So what I'm going to be asking you to do is to imagine that you are the chick emerging from the egg, which will take some imagination. And we want you to write in that voice. You can use the I voice for the chick emerging, or you can just not use pronouns and use a much more experimental form of writing. Because after all, when we're writing about the more than human world, we can be quite radically imaginative in the way we use language, you know. So you might be doing a mixture of language and mark making as well, as Judy's just said. So it's an exercise in free writing and imagination and empathy. It's not about any particular genre or form. You know, you can think about that later if you want, but you don't need to think, oh, I'm writing poetry now, or I'm writing prose. So write exactly how you want. And what we want you to do is to think about the bird's body, think about the senses, the sounds that we've just heard in that video, the movements through the world, actions in the world of the chick, but also of the parent birds outside. So what I'm going to ask you to do in the exercise in terms of the practicalities is to listen to the prompt, then pause the computer and write for as long as you wish. This is an advantage because in the in-person workshop, of course, everyone has to write for the same length of time, but you can choose. So you just put the video, you put the computer back on again, you know, each time. And there's 7 prompts. So they're quite short. And all I'm asking you to do is to write for as long as you can, in a sense. Now, doing this exercise is in itself a valuable thing to do. But if you like what you've produced and you're interested in what you've produced, you can then do a second stage, which is to actually start to sort of mark up the bits you like, or maybe one particular stage of those 7 prompts that you liked, edit and work up the material into a poem or prose piece. And again, you know, I know we've all said this every time, but we are really interested to see the work that you produce in relation to this. So I'm going to ask you to grab your pencil and your piece of paper. I'm going to give you the first prompt. And Judy has selected some images to go with these prompts. So in the first prompt, I want you to imagine yourself in the egg with that sense of safety and security, but also you're nearing the end of your time in that egg. And you must have a sense, as Nicola just suggested, of having grown and perhaps grown too much, of being sort of folded and incipient and waiting. And you're also turning. And I imagine that there's some sense there of almost panic that you might not find the way out. So that's the first stage, to imagine that stage, and perhaps to also imagine the knocking of the mother bird, which we've just heard. So that's your first prompt. So if you want to pause the video now and write in that form. Your second prompt is the trigger. And the trigger is a certain moment. And it's also the moment where you reach the physical ability to be able to knock your way out of the egg with the action of your beak. So this is a really liminal stage that we're thinking about. You're in a half in, half out stage, and you're looking for what's described as the shoulder of the egg. You're going to break through the air cell and take your first breath, your first sense of oxygen. So that's the trigger moment, and that's your second prompt. So you can pause again now. Your third prompt is the first view, the first sight, and the sensation and the sound of the first view of the outside world. And I'm thinking particularly about the redshank, as I have been all the way through these 3 exercises. And that's a precocial bird. So it's so much more impressive than we are when we're born. You know, it's able to see and to appreciate so much more, and to do so much more than the human baby could do. But also this stage, that first view, is the first view of the parent birds and possibly the siblings. So the redshank may have 3 siblings. Who's come out first? I don't know. You can decide that. So that is your third prompt, the first view, the first communication with the outside world. The fourth prompt, and this is very appropriate, this image that Judy's chosen, which is an image of samphire, which of course we all know is delicious. But whether the redshank would think so is another matter. But the next thing is hunger, that sense of needs, that sense of being outside the egg, the self-contained system that's contained and enclosed you, and needing something from the outside. So you might have a sense of sort of begging, of needing, and maybe even competing for what you need. So that is the fourth prompt. In the fifth prompt, I want us to move on to landscape and to start to think about immersion, which was something Judy was talking about when she was showing those paintings of her own low down perspective. And we also saw that in the video we saw earlier. So how does the young chick, the young bird, see that vegetation, perceive that vegetation, feel it in the body, and hear it in terms of sound and all the senses, in a sense? How is that vegetation perceived? How are you going to write about that perception of landscape? That's your fifth prompt. In the sixth prompt, I want you to think about other species. So what we're struck by on the marsh is some incredibly large and extraordinary birds, you know, like the little egrets, the Canada geese, the swans that might be flying overhead, but also maybe the sense of humans, the sense of the threat and danger that humans might pose. So that sense of you as a little chick, perceiving for the first time another species, and how you might sense that, the sight of that, the sound of that, your reaction, your movement, your physical response to that quite shocking first perception of other, much larger species in the world. So that's your 6th prompt. And finally, in the 7th prompt, again, thinking about these extraordinary precocial birds that can go forth and forage when they're incredibly young. So the first movement out into that landscape must be the most extraordinary movement. Will you dare to do that? How will that feel? How will moving through the marsh grasses feel, and seeing all those other creatures, and also creatures that may end up being your food, like the little invertebrates, the marsh pools, the creeks, and the landscape in general, going out into the world. So that's your last prompt. And what we can see here is a couple of people who very generously have donated to us their first drafts, what they wrote when we were doing that exercise. And you can see that sense of going from egg to nest to outside that one of those contributors is talking about there. That sense of being tightly confined, and then the calling and the squeezing. And there's really that sense of body. It's a very, really bodily one, that one on the right-hand side there. And then on the left, you can see that really interesting piece of work. And that is written in the I voice, which is also interesting to dare to do that. It's quite a daring and interesting thing to do, I think. And that person is choosing and selecting pieces by encircling them, or you could highlight them, the bits that you really like of what you've written. And when you do that kind of free writing exercise, then you can often surprise yourself, and find that you've actually written something that really excites you and that's really interesting and different and original, because you're not thinking too much about it, you're just responding to those prompts. So if that's happened, again, do work it up and do see if you can write an amazing kind of chick emerging into the world, Secret Life of Birds poem that emerges from this workshop exercise. So thank you for doing that.
Okay, so we've reached the end of the exercises that are part of this online workshop. Thank you very much for taking part. We really hope that you've enjoyed the experience and gained something from it, and that you feel inspired to, work up the pieces that you've done here into more developed pieces as well. And as we've said many times, we'd love to see them. So please do submit them so that we can. If you feel that you would like to get a bit more of a sense of the place of Tetney Marshes and Humberston Fitties, and if you aren't able to visit there yourself, please do go onto our website and have a look at our short introductory video about the whole project, where you can see the place and also see us talking even more. And you can also come on a walk with us through the marshes and onto the Humberston Fitties via the podcast that we also have on the website. And then just finally, just a reminder, please do tell us what you think by completing our questionnaire on the website. Just when you go back to the page that you came onto this workshop from, please do go on so that we can continue to kind of improve and develop the workshops that we do in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.